It's Thursday afternoon, happy hour, chapter 29, Dog is My Shepherd. So, had to run to the local deli to get some jug wine, Woodbridge, from Monsieur Mondovi, Sauvignon Blanc. It's the cheapest one I could get. And it tastes good. It's wonderfully. And, little glass of wine. And joined by Bluey the dog, since this is a chapter about a dog. So there he is, fine dog, really good dog. So we're in for a treat. If you recall, Paul has returned from the Bootleggers Express trip to New York, and the story picks up from there. Chapter 29, Dog is My Shepherd. Back in the vineyard, there was work. A row of pregnant vines carries more weight than Steph's imaginary double Ds. Conjure a row of 25 vines carrying 15 pounds of fruit per vine plus the canes, another 10 pounds plus the dense leaves in summer, another 10 pounds, each vine supported by wire, some 60 pounds per vine, 1,500 pounds per row, with longer rows bearing a ton. Opposing endposts straining in a marathon tug of war, wooden poles worn by burning sun, rotting rain, and worst of all, termites. Paul discovered them inside dying poplar trees in the original Kiwi Farm's rotted post. And wasn't the neighbor's house below tented? I better call the termite inspector. Paul put that on the to-do list. There's wine to rack, barrels to top, barrels to bottle, and a vineyard that needs maintenance. At winter's end, wires hung lower than two friends celebrating a moment of liberated womanhood before a double mastectomy whose nakedness is unveiled after leaves fall and canes prune. The vintners took their tensioning tool, attached them to gripples, and like vice grips, tightened sagging wires. Miguel was proud of his straight wires, and Paul, not to be outdone, started at the cordon wire and pulled, resulting in an instant breast lift and smart-looking profile. He tightened the wire above the cordon on one side, then the other. Then he pulled the top wire tight and pulled again, and noticed it was loose. Something wasn't right. He walked to the row's end and found a broken pole. He couldn't wait to brag about his strength. Alas, it wasn't Paul's brawn, but water, time, and termites that destroyed the post of the vineyard's longest row. When they installed the vineyard with materials staged in assembly line efficiency, they set and wired dozens of poles a day. To fix a lone pole, especially at the property's furthest corner, was an afternoon project. As spring had sprung and the first buds had popped like sautéed kernels of dried corn, there was no time for delay, because if the fragile shoots grew longer, the hope of the harvest could easily be damaged, changing a pole. "Come, Bluey, let's go," Paul called, and they fetched a pick, a pole digger, 2 60-pound concrete bags, a wheelbarrow, and, like pioneers traveling over mountain passes through the Oregon Trail, returned to the property's edge, led by the barking dog. The broken pole was at the border of a riparian forest of scrub bush that blanketed the valley between Blue Merle Mountain and the Lawrence Welk Resort's hilltop mansions on the other side. The valley was a perfect path for fire and coyotes, whose superhighway cut through the area. At its thickest, it was difficult to walk through the valley without a machete, and Paul, momentarily struck with vineyarditis, thought of asking his neighbor about leasing part of that land so he could cut down the scrub and expand his plantings of Grenache. Paul used shovel and pickaxe to chip away at the broken pole's concrete footing, then decided it was easier to dig a new hole behind the broken pole and insert a new pole. The vineyard's perfect alignment was gone, and he didn't care. Bluey supervised the operation, excited by the digging, for he knew gophers were active in this area and waited for Paul to set traps. The vines had been tamed, harnessed, and controlled by a trellis system, but the moment the wire was cut, the vines were set free. How would they react unshackled? Flee across the border to live with free vines? Alas, these vines, trellis since birth, stood there astonished, unsure what to do. One of the nice teenage vines in the row's middle called, "Look, Dad, no hands!" This miraculous declaration fell on ears closed to muffle sounds of Sheila's songs, and he missed the call of the vine. He did, however, hear the call of coyotes in the canyon below as they woke. As the sun set, cute coyote pups cried good morning to their mothers, but since Paul didn't speak coyote, he didn't understand how hungry they were, and Bluey barked a warning. "Stay the fuck off this property, bitches!" Strong words from the good-natured dog. Coyote stirred his inner beast. The earth was composed of soft topsoil and mud at this bottom corner, and Paul used post diggers to dig a narrow shaft 3 feet deep. He inserted a 10-foot pole, leaning like a tower in pizza. The sun had set, but the twilight sky provided enough light to work. "Bluey, food," Sheila called from the house, which Paul couldn't hear, but the dog's ears did, and he trotted home. Dinner time. Paul hiked up the steep hillside to turn on a faucet 50 yards away, and the hose spit water for mixing concrete. I wish she'd put nozzles on the hoses to cut down waste, he thought, stepping down the hill. He picked up the hose, poured water over the concrete in the barrel, then marched back uphill to turn off the valve, cursing. She wastes so much water watering her persimmon trees, birds of paradise, and rose bushes without a nozzle, ignoring water police rules. She's going to get busted and fined. He stirred dusty concrete with his shovel into a slurry the consistency of cookie dough, but it was too dry. He needed more water, and marched back up the hill to turn on the spigot, this time banging his trusty shovel against boulders as a warning sign to any carnivores. It was now dark, the path lit by soft moonlight, the clanging intended to deter any stalking mountain lion or coyote, but drew attention to himself from the pack below, who knew exactly where to go, zeroing in with no dog to sound an alarm. I'd be finished by now if she put nozzles on the hoses like I asked her to and didn't have to walk up and down this hill to turn off the water so many times. He looked at the faint orange glow on the horizon, and these words entered his mind. Dog is my shepherd, I shall not want. He lies down in shade under the trees. He leads me down rows of vines. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I fear no evil, for dog is with me. He comforts me. I prepare a feast before him. He anoints my head with licks. My cup runs over with wine. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the dog forever. Was that house of the dog or the doghouse? Shit, I'm condemned forever, he realized, stirring the concrete to the consistency of lumpy mashed potatoes, just like his mother's. As he repeated the psalm of Paul, Salah, half the pack stealthily slipped under the fence and gathered at his rear, while the vanguard jumped the fence at the other end and approached Paul from the front. He was surrounded by hungry coyotes, with the exit to his left blocked by a tall fence, the exit to his right blocked by a steep hill with rows of vines. Growling coyotes stepped closer, barked, then howled with delight at their impending meal. Paul texted Sheila. "Coyotes, send Bluey." "Bluey!" she summoned, opening the front door and commanding, "Go to Papa!" And he galloped in racehorse mode, racing up the hill and flew over the top bank, soaring through the air like Superdog. The coyotes growled, and Paul raised his shovel, shouting, "Go away!" and swung the shovel like a samurai, brandishing his sword. Whoosh! 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 And the pack's leader blinked, sensing more fight here than in a rabbit, and held off a moment as Bluey galloped down the hill, barking in attack mode, rarely seen in such a peaceful dog. The pack scattered when Sheila arrived at the top of the crest, clanging 2 copper saucepans. They walked back towards the house, praising their hero. "Bluey, Good boy, Bluey, good boy." Paul grilled lamb chops, letting Bluey chew the bones, and from that day they called that corner of the vineyard the Valley of Death. When Paul returned by the light of day, a huge vulture took flight. He found ripped fur and a severed rabbit's foot near the endpost. He scooped up the remains before Bluey snagged them, catapulting them over the chain-link fence. The pole was set, and he drilled holes and pulled through wire, a task he could do by himself without Miguel and his fancy wiring. Liberated vines riding bikes with no hands were retrellised to the wire, and a few shed tears, while wiser vines knew the trellis support would help. One big old vine threatened, "Someday, pal, you'll get yours, and I'll eat the flesh of your bones like that vulture." No wonder some vines were difficult to control. Paul heard only their soothing songs, ignorant of any ominous intention.